So Jake, did you change your video settings by chance?
Nope.
Okay. I'm not able to see your video. You can play around with the video to see if it's coming up, but for some reason it's blank there. Whoop. Now it's jumping around. Okay. Anyway, you can play with those settings. Not a big deal for today if it's for some reason not coming through, but you got to sometimes select the right thing on the video because you were showing up just fine before. So, but you can see and hear me okay apparently?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll play on. So here's that market system that I think is pretty awesome. So we have to kind of wrap our brains around this again. Economics is the study of making people happy. Given the fact that there's limited resources, it forces us to make choices. So in one of the more pure sense, economics is the study of choice and the choices we make. Economics is a word that gets sloshed around a little too much, like, oh, well, it's just the economics of it or whatever. And most of the people don't really understand how robust economics is and all the topics that we talk about. So it's really the study of choice, I think, is a really plain, simple way to narrow it down. What forces us to have choices is the limited resources that we have. And so we characterize those resources as being owned by all the people. Some people have more than others. Trump has access to a little more resources than most of us in this room, right? For better or for worse. That through the market system and hopefully not corruption, he owns that stuff or he has rights to that stuff. So, but the idea is that individuals have ownership ultimately of the resources in the economy. And so in order to make themselves as happy as possible, they found it nice to convert those resources, especially labor, right? Convert my ability to work by selling it to a business, come over here for 8 hours a day, get a paycheck. So I do that in the resource market, but that's true of all resources, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. All of the things that we have at our disposal are owned by somebody over here who's making that decision again, the study of choice, to sell it voluntarily to somebody over here who's choosing to purchase it voluntarily. And in exchange, they give them stuff like wages, rents, interest, profits. Then those people, as a matter of just living out their lives and trying to make themselves as happy as possible, run to places like Walmart and Applebee's and other stores and buy materials. Sometimes we buy services, right? So we've got goods and services, final goods and services being supplied by businesses back to the households in exchange for payments on those things. That's the market system. So when we refer to capitalism, what is capitalism? It's allowing individuals to pursue their own happiness. Boy, that sounds something like in the Constitution, Declaration of Independence. I don't know. I'm not very good with some of that historical documents, but right? The pursuit of happiness. So we let individuals do their own thing is the idea really behind capitalism. But it's not anarchy. It's not without some sort of guiding rules, the rule of law, and that necessitates us kind of coming collectively together to establish those rules and form the government. So that pulls in our third agent of the global economy, households, businesses, and government. So now we've got them involved in the market system because in order to function, they need to have some money coming in to pay for their expenses. So we talked about taxes and government spending. All right, so let me pause there for a sec. Any questions on that general setup? This is really just an overview of what we did a lot more in detail last time. Yeah?
Where did you say we can find those, the images on here?
Oh, good. My Econ Lab. So on My Econ Lab, off to the left panel, there is the a button called Buckets and Circular Flows. And that is this, and it's about 20 pages of these. And you can just print those off. Okay, anybody else? All right, so then this chapter especially, we're introducing the rest of the road. So if we were a closed economy, we were on our own little island, maybe we didn't even know the rest of the world existed, right? We just have our own little island, and we went about our business forming a government, and so we've got U.S. households, the U.S. government, U.S. businesses, and now we found, oh, hey, there's other islands around this little globe that we're spinning on, and so now we can trade with them potentially, and so that opened up the discussion of exports and imports. What was an export? We're in the United States. What's an export? Sending something out of the United States. Good. So selling something technically to somebody in Rome, some other country. Here's an interesting one, a little known fact, that one of our bigger exports to China, one of our bigger United States exports to China, anybody want to take a guess? I think it's kind of funny. It's kind of ironic in a sense. Chopsticks. We export chopsticks to China. So it's like we got the food thing going for us that maybe they wouldn't be able to eat if we got into World War II or something, but I doubt it. They'll probably find some other instruments to use. But yeah, they buy a lot of chopsticks from us, it turns out. And of course, you know, all the plastic fun toys, you know, anytime you see something made of plastic that's kind of rinky-dink, like this little water bottle, this is one of those fancy water bottles, but they do fancy water bottles too. A good chance this was done in China, right? How many people got iPhones? Where was that made? China, probably. So they're one of their largest manufacturing plants is in China. So lots of things going on. And so that's what we're setting the stage for this chapter 7. And we started building a model of should we trade? You know, what are the reasons for trade? More so now than in other times in my life, there's some anti-trade sentiment with Trump talking about raising tariffs and taxing, and some people call it incentives, and some people call it threats of going after individual businesses like Carrier air conditioners. Are you guys familiar with that story? So that was big in the political campaign. Carrier air conditioner and Ford Motor Company. You guys heard of Ford before? They're the ones that make the cars. So Ford and Carrier, at around the same time frame, announced that they were going to be moving a plant to Mexico. And this was during, I can't remember what, it was over the summer sometime maybe, or remember exactly when it was, they made this announcement. So it was a period of time transpired. And so Trump early on came back and said, that's not going to happen if I'm elected president or whatever, you know, in his language. That's not going to happen, or he wants to stop that from happening. So don't take me direct quote here. And so sure enough, as you know, the moral of the story, he ends up getting elected. And all of a sudden, those companies now have both pledged to stay in the United States. So Ford's going to keep their plant in the United States, and Carrier Air Conditioner is out of Indiana. They're going to keep their plant. They're going to open up a plant. It's not a small thing. It was a multi-million, I want to even say into the billions for one of those plants, and so a decent amount of jobs and that. And so is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Well, if the companies felt threatened because the government was threatening them, I'd say that's really bad. I'm not for that at all. That's not capitalism. That's not allowing free markets. It's not voluntary, right? You've heard me say the word voluntary quite a few times. It's not voluntary. However, as they've come out publicly, and what I suspect is the truth, is that Trump has pledged to change some things around and be a little more friendly through reduced regulations and corporate income tax. Probably corporate income tax maybe being the bigger thing. Although places like Carrier air conditioning, they get into Freon, and there's been a lot of environmental regulations regarding air conditioners that have impacted that industry. So they claim, and like I said, I think it's true, that they're like, you know, we'll give this new guy a shot. He said, now, what I like about this is that if they choose to stay, which they have, and Trump doesn't reduce the corporate income tax, he looks really bad. right? Because he looks really good to the general public that, by the way, doesn't know the stuff I'm going to do about the benefits of international trade, and that they might have a protectionist mentality. He looks pretty good. He saved 1,000 jobs or whatever, and he's doing what he said. But if he doesn't do the reduction in regulations to some degree, or at least revisiting those that he's pledged to reduce, and reduce the corporate income tax, he's going to look awfully bad. Like, oh, I tricked them into staying, and they didn't, and that's going to cause problems. So the reason I like this is that I think he got action. Now he has to have some action. So I think he's going to have to carry through on his pledges, which you guys might not follow this very closely, but presidents often don't carry through with what they say on the campaign trail, right? They get into office, and now that they're in office, circumstances change, and they don't always follow through with everything they said. So I think there's a little more weight on Trump on that in that regard. So we'll see how that plays out. But right now, we're talking Japan and the United States in a economic model so that you guys can have something to hang your hat on and believe or not believe that there's some benefits to both countries engaged in trade, that this creates some win-win situations. So last time we had, let me see if I can squeeze this up here. You guys helped me rebuild this. Those of you who weren't here, I think most of you were, so you don't have to redraw this. But we had the USA and Japan, and we were looking at food and cars. And tell me about those Americans and their productivity. How much food can an average American make? 4 units of food per unit of labor. And if they put everybody, or if they were doing cars, that same American worker could on average make how many cars? 8. So 8 cars for every unit of labor. Over in Japan, a Japanese worker could do 5 units of food for every labor. But if they put themselves into car production, they were substantially higher with 25 units of cars for every labor. And then we said that the labor force in the United States was twice as big as that in Japan. And from there, we constructed the production possibilities for each country. And we had the United States off to the left, Japan off to the right. And we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16,000 cars possible, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,000 units of food possible. Another possibility that we did was just 8 and 4. If we draw it real carefully, we get the production possibilities frontier for the United States, the PPF, production possibilities frontier. The United States, if they were operating on their own little island in a closed economy, in theory could be anywhere along this frontier. We talked about the trade-offs. What's the trade-off in the United States? If I want another unit of food, what does it cost me? 2 cars. Right? So 1 unit of food is going to cost me 2 cars, or vice versa. A car is going to cost me a half a unit of food, was the thing we showed. All right, over in Japan, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. One production possibility with their 1,000 workers was to make 25,000 cars given their labor productivity. And if we send that worker instead off for food, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We use the little star to denote the foreign country, so they could have 5, or they could be anywhere in between. So 3 and 10, is that a possibility? 3 and 10. What's the slope of the line? What's the slope of the PPF? We didn't do this last time, so I'm kind of tacking this onto you. What's the slope of the production possibilities frontier in Japan? The slope. Lance, 5. Kind of right, but not quite. Ashley, -5. So, I only bring that up because you do have to be careful sometimes on some of the descriptions. It's a downward slope. So from our math test that you guys have done pretty good on, by the way, the slope is negative. So it's rise over run. The rise is actually a fall, right? So it's a negative rise, a negative. We can do it any way we want, anywhere along here. Remember how slopes work is I could go down 10 over, and people, this is one that a lot of you get messed up with online or calculating slopes, is you'll take this 3, like down 10 over 3. But you really remember going from here to here. So it's down 10 over 2, right? So down 10 over 2 gives me a slope of -5. Questions there? Slope over here. Slope.
-2.
-2. Good. So down 16 over 8, down 8 over 4. Doesn't matter. You get -2. So the slope now ends up playing an important role with that trade-off idea I gave you, right? The slope is the trade-off for each country. All right, so the slope and opportunity cost end up playing an intimate role with each other. So let's start there by looking at the opportunity cost of each good in each country. So the opportunity cost, so write this down. This is new in your notes here. Well, I added a little bit of stuff from last time too with the slope, so add that, make sure you add that. The opportunity cost of one food in the United States is, what is the cost of one food? Now, let me go back to Lance, not to pick on you too much, Lance, but you were good with your 5, and I like that. That's why I'm coming back to you, just to give you a hint. So what's the cost of one food in the United States? 2 cars. Ashley, is it really -2 cars? No, not with costs. When we think of costs, like what did this drink cost you? Well, it cost me $3, right? We express it as a positive, right? So the slope from a mathematical standpoint is negative. But when we think about the real world, which is what I try to do, by the way, I don't try to stick with the math. We use math as a tool, but we're trying to tell real world stories here, right? The cost of a food in the United States is 2 cars. The opportunity cost of one food in Japan is, what does a food run us in Japan? 5 cars. 5 cars. Therefore, who is the low-cost provider of food? The U.S. But you might say, but wait a second, Japan was better at both goods, right? A Japanese worker is more productive than that fat, lazy American. One way to think about it, right? Maybe not the most glamorous picture, but the Japanese worker is more productive. They're better at both goods. They have an absolute advantage in production. But luckily for us, that doesn't matter for trade, because when we look at the trade-offs internal to each country, we learn that the Japanese have to give up 5 cars to get the one food, whereas the United States only gives up 2. So therefore, these 3 dots is kind of another math symbol that's kind of nice for shorthand. Therefore, USA has the lower opportunity cost for food. Parentheses, it has a comparative advantage in food. I wrote out comparative advantage in your notes before, so I just put CA here. That should be in your notes from Wednesday. So the United States has the lowest opportunity cost in food. We say that it has a comparative advantage. Comparing the United States trade-offs to the Japanese trade-offs, it has a comparative advantage in food. All right, the opportunity cost of one car in the United States is, what does a car cost us in the United States? A half. All right, now this is where it starts to get a little wonky. And I think you'll find for your homework problems and stuff, if you, and those of you who have micro, you have the luxury of doing this a few times. By the way, just so you know, chapters 1 and 2 is the overlap between micro and macro. So everybody gets 2 again. So this opportunity cost stuff, those of you, this is your first time, you're getting it for the first time, chapter 2. This micro is a review for those others. But I'm hitting it in a different way here, talking about countries. But really, this is chapter 2 with comparative advantage. All right. So think about the trade-offs. You can think about it with slope, or you can think about looking at what the trade-offs are. We know that 2 cars equals 1 food, right? That one was kind of easy because the slope was 2. Now, what we can do is, I don't want the cost of 2 cars. I want the cost of 1 car. So how do I get a 1 over here using the equation? Divide by 2. What I do to one side of the equal sign, I got to do to the other, and then it just jumps right out at you. 1 car equals 1/2 of a food. So our answer here for the opportunity cost of a car in the United States is 1/2 of a food. The opportunity cost of 1 car in Japan is 1/5. So again, come back. We know that 5 cars with a little star equals 1 food. I don't want 5 cars, I want 1 car. The opportunity cost of 1 car is 1/5 of a food. Oops, not a star up here. All right. So who's the low-cost provider of cars? Japan. Now this is where we got fractions, so don't be embarrassed ever if you need to pull out your calculator. Not your phone, by the way, but a calculator. 1 divided by 5 is 0.2. I should have started with the easy one. 1 divided by 2 is 0.5, 50 cents versus 20 cents, right? So just kind of remember with your fractions, this is definitely lower. Therefore, Japan is low cost in cars and has a comparative advantage in cars. They had an absolute advantage in both goods, but a comparative advantage in cars. All right, so now we bring back that idea of specialization. If we were to kind of think about what would be the optimal thing to do if we were going to be trading with each other, who should make cars, who should make food? US makes food, Japan makes cars, and they trade with each other, right? That's simple. Now, let's suppose that they started off at point A for the United States at 8 and 4. I'm just kind of hypothetically, by the way, pulling that out. We know that it's a possibility. So let's say that point A star is the starting point in Japan. So both countries are going along about their business, do-do-do, da-da-da. making 10 and 3 and 8 and 4 respectively. And they're like, oh, okay, let's think about trading. Should Japan, well, first of all, we're going to be heading this way, right? We're going to make more cars in Japan, more food in the United States. So in terms of the production possibilities frontier, we're traveling this way for the United States. We're traveling this way for Japan. My main question is, should Japan go all the way to here? Does that sound like a good idea? Why? I see some heads shaking. What's that? Okay, there might be dependency. So what? So what if we're dependent on the U.S.? Is that a problem? If they don't produce, you're screwed. If we go to war, whatever, something like that. Well, all of that stuff is true, but it doesn't belong in an economic model. So our assumptions here are that they're going to play by rules of the game for this particular economic model. The economic model is not reality. So sometimes we got to be careful with this. This is kind of a baby step in our thinking process. So I think I told the micro people this, so bear with me. When I first heard of an economic model, when I was in your seats 25, 27 years ago, when the professor said an economic model, I immediately thought of my General Lee car that I used, that I built. So a little car kit, little plastic, deal. And so the General Lee, the Dukes of Hazzard was a popular show for me growing up, and so I had this little kit car thing that I had built for the General Lee. And so, strangely enough, that little kit car, that model of the General Lee and an economic model have some connections. And here's what they are. The General Lee is all proportional, right? If the model's good. I mean, it is right down to the Dodge Charger. Sorry, that's a Charger for the General Lee. The Dodge Charger is all proportional, right? So if I look at the trunk and the wheel wells and the cab, everything looks like the big car, the real deal. It's been all scaled down appropriately. And I can even open the little hood and I can see what a V8 engine looks like in the Dodge Charger. They had everything to specs, right? Might even have little rubber wheels. Of course, the markings on the General Lee, the 01 and the orange color, all of that gives me a pretty good indication of what the real General Lee looks like. But at the same time, I know it's not the real General Lee. An economic model is kind of similar. In society, we have lots of moving parts, right? I like to think of the real world as being really chaotic. Imagine, if you could, the cash registers, they don't make as much noise as they used to, but the amount of transactions going on in Ottawa right now as we speak. How many times is a card being swiped, register being run up, a beep, beep, beep over at Walmart, a beep, beep, beep at Dollar General, at the gas station, at the pump? How many are going on right now just in Ottawa? How many transactions are going on in Ottawa? Imagine if you could just hear them at the restaurants, other places. And then, of course, it only blows your mind more to think, well, what about the state of Kansas? How many transactions? How many transactions are going on in the United States right now as we speak? It's mind-blowing. It's mind-boggling, right? So the real economy is very chaotic and kind of confusing. There's lots of things going on. And so what an economic model does for us is it allows us to kind of freeze some of that chaos. So I'm going to go this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and I'm going to pull them down into this economic model and kind of hold them constant for a little bit. And then I'm going to say, well, what if this thing changes just a little bit? What happens to the other ones, right? And so I create an artificial environment that hopefully, if I did it right, gives me some insights about how the real world works. But at the same time, I know it's not the real world. That's what these economic models do for us. It's hopefully going to give us some insights about the real world. But of course, we don't have to think of every single real world event that would cause us to not fully specialize. Although those are interesting side topics that come about from this thought experiment of using full specialization. All right, so moral of the story, for our economic model, in order to maximize the benefits or the gains from trade, we're going to send the Japanese all the way up to point B. Full specialization. And we're going to send the Americans all the way down to point B. Full specialization. So now, mentally, we're saying the United States is sitting with 8,000 units of food, and the Japanese sitting with 25,000 cars, and we're going to allow them to trade with each other now. Okay? All right, let me pause there. I've said quite a bit. Questions? All right, let me write some of that out before, I'm going to just write it right here. So this conclusion here, after we wrote this, Japan is low cost. So now the idea of trade is to maximize the gains from trade, in this model. Japan should fully specialize in cars and trade for food. Japan should fully specialize in cars. So full specialization is the idea of sending them all the way up to maximum production at 25,000. The United States should fully specialize in food and trade for cars. So, what would be a good price that makes the United States pretty happy? So, in other words, what would be the selling price for the United States that would make them better off? What would the price need to be if they were to sell 1 unit of food over to Japan? What's the minimum amount they must get? What's the absolute minimum they must get from the Japanese?
2 cars.
2 cars. Why?
Something they can make.
That's what they can do. Absolutely. Great. Well said. They can do that themselves, right? So why would they trade with the Japanese if they're only going to get 2? They could do it themselves and be just as well off. So the United States is going to be interested in this trade idea. If they can give up a unit of food and get greater than 2 cars, that's a deal for them, right? It is actually impossible for them to be made better off as long as they're getting 2 cars. What about the Japanese? If they're going to give up a car, this one's a little bit tougher to think through. Remember, we're starting up here. If they're going to give up, in fact, let me do it a little bit easier for you. If they're going to give up 5 cars, what's the absolute minimum they need to get from the Americans in terms of food? The absolute minimum would be 1. If they give up 5 cars, they can get 1 themselves. So if they get greater than 1, that's a pretty good deal for them. Right? That's a pretty good deal. So that's kind of where we start off with. So these 2 come to the table and they're kind of maybe bickering back and forth, and maybe one of them throws out an offer and the other throws out an offer. And so finally, I'm going to just start us off with what they ended up at, just as an assumption. So let's say that they came down to 3 cars for every food. So assume, I'm just going to write over here, assume that the terms of trade, that's the econ term, or one of them for this, the terms of trade are 3 cars for every 1 food. 3 cars for every 1 food. Now, the terms of trade are really a price, right? It's not in dollars, but it's a price. What does 1 food cost you? Oh, it's going to cost you 3 cars. So we can also think of it that the world price is equal to 3 cars for every food. And use this notation with upstairs and downstairs. Don't do it like this. Not that it's totally wrong, but we're going to come back to this when we get into currency in later chapters. We're going to do something very similar. So do 3 cars for every food. Now, would you call that the price, the world price of cars or the world price of food? 3. Is that the price of food or the price of cars? Price of food? I heard a car. It's kind of hard a little bit sometimes, right? But when we go to Walmart and we think of the price of something, it's priced per unit, right? So how much does 1 unit cost me? It costs me 3 cars. So the way we have it written, this is the world price of food. What's the world price of cars? What does 1 car cost me? A third, right? We just flip it over again, kind of like what we saw with the terms of trade. So in terms of in terms of food, we can also think of the world price of cars being 1/3 of a food per car. All right, so now that we've got that down, we want to calculate what the gains from trade are. So starting at point A, what is the gains? What are the gains? What is the gain from trade? We can go plural or singular, doesn't matter. What is the gain from trade for the United States? So in other words, if the world price is really what we got up here, and the United States is really at point A, for starters, with 8,000 cars and 4,000 food, what are the gains from trade from the United States if, assuming they want to get back to 4,000 food? After you write that down, and then I'm going to give you guys, I'm going to walk around the room, and you guys are going to work on this. You can work in teams too, or look with your neighbor. But just so we're clear where we're at, I'm at point A. I decide I'm going to trade. I shift production to point B. I'm sitting here with 8,000 food, and I want some cars to drive. I'm going to sell 4,000 food to get back to where I was before so that my belly's just as full as it used to be, and I'm not getting too heavy because I'm already a big, fat, lazy American, and I don't need more food, so I need to drive around. What is the gain from trade if they sell off that 4,000 food? Go. Yeah. you got questions, feel free to ask me as I'm walking through. Yeah. What's your word here? So it sounds like you're on the right track. Keep working on it. I'm going to allow some people to come to the board and share their work. Yeah.
And the PBJ in the walking, check it out, it's slow and thinking. Okay, so there's a difference in 4 versus 4. And so the price, yeah, oh no.
All right, so kind of excited to see where we're at here. So what are the gains from trade? In other words, what are gains from trade? What do we gain by doing all this? So extra credit for somebody who wants to come up and give their work here. I saw Lance's first, Melanie. A similar face here. You want to go too?
No.
Okay. Lance, come on up. You're the first contestant. Melanie, be prepared. So, just so we're clear, I'm asking you to show the gain. What is the gain from trade? Okay, go for it.
Okay, so they sell 4 food
Yep.
here. 4 foods times 3, so they gain 12,000 cars.
Okay.
Here.
So, what's your answer? The gain is 12?
Yeah. 12,000.
Okay. And you show me graphically.
Okay. 4.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you. You're wrong. But thank you for playing our game today.
Yeah.
You're like the first person that I've ever seen do that, so I am interested in that. Yeah. So let me come back to you, Lance. In fact, I'm going to give you extra credit for giving me, because sometimes I reserve that right. I've never seen that in 25 years of doing this. That interesting of a wrong answer on this particular problem. So Lance, good job for highlighting a wrong answer for us. Melanie, come on up. All right, let's give you blue.
Okay, well, they have the 12,000, but they already could have made 8,000, so you take the 12,000 minus 8,000, which gives you 4,000, which is what you're actually making.
Okay, show me graphically. Okay, thank you. Getting closer. What did you say they're making? Okay, I like that. So extra credit, we're getting closer. Totally wrong. Partly wrong. Who can help out with the graph here? Drew, come on up. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, don't draw any of this, you guys, until I...
Well, if they're selling off to get 4,000.
Yep.
They'd end up with 12,000 total.
Nice.
They'd end up there, and that would be their new point.
Yep.
Instead of being a point A, they'd go up to that point there.
Good. Okay, so if you were to graphically show the gain of 4, which Melanie was right on, where would you show that? Okay, I could live with that. There you go. Yeah, I like that. Go head towards the vertical axis and show it there, because your gain is really coming to you in cars, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, I'll take that. Thank you. All right, so cool. Let me not forget my extra credit here. All right, so that brought up some good points here. You know, and Lance you had the right calculation with the 12. right? I mean, so that part was good. So let's start there. Drew did it nicely. You know, make the graph and the math start to make sense. In fact, I didn't give you my goggle theory yet, did I? What, those of you who had me for micro, did goggle theory help you a little bit when you learned goggle theory? No? Should I skip goggle theory for the first time ever? All right. So let's make I'll probably end up saying it later, but let's make the math work with our story. So we start at A, we move to B, we sell off 4,000 because that's what the problem told us to do to get back to having 4. On the world market, we get 3 cars for every food, so that bumps us up to 12, right? And so that 12 here, this is the gain from trade right here, these 4 units. These 4 cars, 4,000 cars, that is the gain from trade for the United States. Now, that is one point there possible, but we didn't have to sell off 4. If we did 1, I give up 1, and how many do I get? According to 3. So this is what's cool. If I did it myself, I give up 1, I get 1, 2, boom, 3, right? So 1, 2, 3, I give up 1, I get 3. The reason I say boom is that this is really freaking exciting in that all of my new possible consumption points are outside of my production possibilities. When I lived on the island all by myself, when I lived on the island, well, not necessarily by myself, but with all my other peeps on the island in isolation, what we produce is what we consume, right? What we make ourselves is what we get to eat. And so the production possibilities was the consumption possibilities. What's awesome with this international trade is that now my consumption possibilities, my CPF, is what we just drew here, my consumption possibilities are all outside of what I could do by myself. In other words, there's no doubt that trade makes me better off. Trade makes me better off. Okay. How about Japan? Let's kind of do a similar exercise with them, maybe in terms of cars. Well, not maybe, but in terms of cars. Let me write some of that out first before we go on, move off of the United States. So assuming they want to get that, that means they're going to sell 4,000 food at 3 cars for every food and get 12,000 cars. So the gain from trade, the gain is equal to our new cars minus the old level we were at, which was only 8,000, equals 4,000 cars. Here it is graphically, here it is kind of working it out. You'll probably need to do both for the test, for your midterm. So this problem is kind of one of those lecture problems that's kind of a good one to know for that stuff. All right, questions before I move on to Japan? All right, so number 2. This is number 1. If Japan starts at A star, what are the gains from trade in terms of cars? What are the gains from trade in terms of cars? Remember, we're starting at B, well, we're starting at A star, but then we're going to engage in trade. We're going to fully specialize, so we shift to B star. Now, doing kind of similar to what we did for the United States, I'm showing the gains from trade in terms of cars. I did it. It was 4,000 here. What did the Japanese get? Go. Uh-oh. Looks like y'all get an extra. A little deeper going on here. So remind me of that. Before I even jump in, I'll have you guys do the extra credit. Just make sure I don't forget. What? Well, that's what I want you to think. So they have 25,000. And I want to show the gains in trade in terms of cars. So get them back to having 3,000. Yep, get them back to 3,000. So this one's a little bit different because we're starting from the other point. If we're showing the gains from trade in terms of car, get the Japanese back to 3,000. Yeah, we're starting at A star, but then we fully specialize. When I say starting, that's the no trade point. I should be more clear with that. When I say starting at A star, that's like you have your country, I have my country, we don't talk to each other, right? So that's the no trade point. Then we're going to trade, so then we move to B star and then trade. So yes, B star is your intermediate step there. We're going to shift production to B star and then trade to show the gains from trade in terms of cars. So get the Japanese back to 3,000 food again. Anybody willing to come to the board? 5,000. All right, come on up. Well, you guys are working on it. No, it doesn't really matter. Whatever feels good to you in here. Got an orange and a red. I don't use red yet. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So what's the actual number?
So the actual gain is 2,000 units of food.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. That is wrong. Interesting answer that I'll come back to follow up with you, but it's not what I asked. I want the gains from trade in terms of cars. Drew, let me get somebody else a shot first. Lance, you already had your shot too. Any fresh faces want to come? Fresh faces, all right. Drew, do your thing, come on up. You're the next contestant on the PPF is right.
You're at the 25,000 cars.
Okay, 25,000 cars, got it.
And you gotta get back to 3,000 food.
Yes.
You have to sell well, I know where you never can't remember.
Okay, I'll let you work through it.
You end up, at 16,000 cars
Okay.
for the 3,000 food.
Okay. So therefore giving you a gain of how much?
Gain of 6,000 cars
Okay.
over the initial point.
All right. Drew got it. So if you guys need a little tutoring, get Drew's number. Nice job, nice job. All right, so you got it, but you need to polish up your presentation here a little bit. So to get back to get me to this 3 point is where you kind of stumbled a little bit, just verbally, Lance.
So two cars.
Now wait a second, you don't have any food. All you have is cars. So you got to talk to me in terms of cars. I'm the Japanese. I'm sitting with 25,000 cars. Put this into a context of explaining what's going on in terms of cars.
Well, you have to sell 9 cars.
Yes. Okay. So by selling 9 cars, why? What are you buying? How many food are you buying? 3. So when you said the 2, that's what threw me. It sounds like maybe you were on the right track. But they're buying 3, right? So I'm sitting with 25,000 cars. The problem is asking, well, get yourself back to 3 food. Well, that means you have to buy 3,000 food on the world market. Lucky for you, the Americans are sitting here ready to sell. How much is it going to cost you to buy a food? 3 cars. So for every 1 food, you're going to buy 3 cars. So in this problem, I'm actually, let's say I sell 3 cars, 1, 2, 3, right? And I get 1 food. I'm actually off here if we're doing this, right? It's the 3 for 1. So let me do it kind of verbally here, and then I'll come back to the graph. So if Japan starts at A star, what are they going to change in terms of cars? The key point is we need to buy 3,000 food at 3 cars for every food, which means you need to sell 9,000 cars. And so for this problem, it's a little bit different. We can do it a couple different ways. 25,000 cars that I have at B star minus the 9,000 leaves me with 16,000 cars left over. Which means the gain, which always kind of throws people, so be careful. That's not the end of the story. The gain is not 16,000 cars. The gain is, as Drew said, 16,000 minus what I started with, which was 10, equals 6,000 cars. So graphically, actually, yeah, Drew's got it here pretty nicely. So down 9 over 3 gets me my point, let's call it C star. I don't think make this C star, by the way, over here too. Or not C star, but C. Okay. So we've shown it once again now that we got maybe kind of a little hung up with the graphs and the math. But just think of the power of what happened here. 2 countries do each other, maybe don't even like each other. Get together, they specialize in what they're good at, and then trade, and we have a win-win situation. Both countries gain from trade. All right, questions? So, one pressing question is, why are there anti-trade people? Why are there anti-trade people? Because they're stubborn, don't want to learn. What did you say?
Trade doesn't always go both ways.
Trade doesn't always go both ways. What do you mean by that?
Like sometimes one country won't benefit as much as the other one.
Okay, but if they both, so this is where the economist in me comes in, that she said one country doesn't benefit as much as the other, which can be true, but if they both benefit from a deal, isn't that still something you should do? Yeah, I mean, that's, if you can't do anything else, if there's no other options, because these are the only 2 countries in the world, but we can always do that in a kind of bilateral basis. You'd always chase where the better gains are, right? So if Japan's not giving me a good deal and Germany's out there, and the Germans say, hey, I'll do this with you, right? So competition is going to drive us to a global price that's fair, if you will, or the best deal out there when we have everybody who's doing what they're best at engaged in trade. So why are there anti-trade people? I still haven't heard it. There is an answer.
If one country goes to war?
No, I'm going to leave the war stuff out. What happened to prices when we engaged in trade? This is not an immediate, I'm not expecting anybody to really jump all over this, but when we engaged in trade, did prices change? First of all, yes, right? So remember, the cost of a unit of food was 2 cars here, right? If I wanted more food, it cost me 2 cars. So the price of food in the United States without trade was 2 cars. Now I go do this trade business, and the new price, what's the slope of this line, by the way? I wanted to bring that up. Down 12 over 4, -3. What's the slope of this line? Down 16, wait, that's not a good one. Let me go. Down 9 over 3. 3, interesting, right? What is 3 equal to? What is 3 equal to? The terms of trade, the price, right? It's the new price that we initiated. So it's an important thing here. The slope of the production possibilities frontier is the opportunity cost of whatever you're measuring on the horizontal axis. I'm going to write this out for you. Turns out that's always true, right? What's the cost of food in the United States? 2 cars. What's the slope of this line? 2. -2, right? We got this little negative thing going on. But what's the cost of food in Japan? 5 cars. What's the slope of the production possibilities frontier? 5. So there's a connection between opportunity cost and the slope of the line. And now, once we engage in trade, the consumption possibilities frontier has an important slope function. It's now the world price. The world price of food is 3 cars. All right, so back to my story here. The price of a food used to be 2 cars, now it's 3. Who is off about that? Who in the U.S.? So we had, remember at point A, I have car manufacturers, car producers, and I've got food producers, all going about their little daily business, making food, some making cars, blah, 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 right? Now, 1 unit of food costs me 3 cars instead of 2.
So car
Who's mad about that? Car producers? How about the consumers? Who's mad about that? Food consumers? Are they going to be mad about that one? If you really like food, it's more costly, right? So prices went up. It's more costly. Over in Japan, let's go pick on those guys for a little bit here. So the cost of a unit of food used to be 5 cars. Now how much does it cost? 3. So I used to have to spend 5 cars. Wow, food is so expensive in Japan. I don't know what the problem is. It always costs me 5 cars every time I go to the grocery store. Now, oh, this international trade thing is great. I go to the grocery store and I can buy food for 3 cars, right? We're going to change that into dollars for you here in a second, or not, that's going to be a little more in a second. But that's what happens. Prices change. And so there's some people that are ticked off and some people that are happy. If you're a food producer and now you get 3 cars instead of 2, are you a happy little food producer in the United States? You betcha, right? So the American producers of food think international trade is a great thing. It's the sliced bread, no pun intended, right? But the Japanese food producers, they're thinking, this sucks. I used to be able to sell my food for 5 cars, now I only get 3. You're putting me out of business, I'm going to have to lay off workers, right? I'm a food producer. I've got mass layoffs coming. Don't trade with the Americans. Now you're starting to see what bubbles up with international trade. Each country gains from trade. We've proven that. Each country gains from trade. But within each country, there are winners and losers from trade because prices change for both goods. And consumers like low prices, producers like high prices. So you're always going to have somebody happy and somebody ticked off, and vice versa. There's always winners and losers on each side. So that's what causes a lot of the tension here in international trade, is that despite there being gains for the country overall, there's winners and losers within each country. All right, so that's where we need to take things next. Questions or comments on that? I will write that on the board. Because that is an important principle that you will probably see on your homework and test. Okay, I have a little pleasant surprise for you. When is your homework and test due? Or when's your test due? Let me just start there.
15.
Sunday. Do we have class Monday?
No.
I'm going to bump it.
Oh, yeah.
Because to me, I just wanted you to be done with it before our next class, before we get into the next material. I'm going to bump that to Monday. I'm not going to put it to Tuesday, but I'm going to put it to Monday. So you're going to have that little extra wiggle room on both the due dates. I'm going to shift those around. So if you get onto my Econ Lab and you say, oh, the due date still says the 15th, do a little email to me and say, oh, the due date didn't change, because that means I forgot. But hopefully I won't. I'll get in there and try to get it done. Okay, so why do we have anti-trade people when both countries gain from it? That's a big question, and a good one. And the answer: within each country, there are winners and losers from trade. Consumers, buyers, right? Consumers like low prices. And you could say low buying prices if you want to think of it that way. Low buying prices. And producers like high prices. So these are like selling prices. Sometimes I goose up students. Consumers like low prices, producers like high prices. Since prices change with trade, there will be one group that likes it and the other who does not. Since prices change with trade, there will be one group that likes it and the other who does not. Now, I want to kind of add one little note to that. Who do we usually hear complaining about trade? Producers or consumers? You guys hear that? Who's the outcry that, what do you hear the most? Do you hear consumers crying, we're going to have to pay 5 cents more per pound. We're currently paying $2 a pound for strawberries, and then the stupid trade thing is going to be $2.05. Or do you tend to hear the strawberry growers saying something different if it goes the other direction? You're going to be putting my family farm out of business. We do a fairly large strawberry growing business in California, and if prices fall from $2 down to $1.95, we're going to have to lay off about 100 people from our small farm. And that's true across all of the California growers. The difference was 5 cents either way. Who do we hear from? The consumers as a group or the producers? The producers. So we have the negative effects concentrated in a smaller group that can be very vocal, right? Whereas the consumers, we don't have like a network to say, let's all fight trade because our strawberries are going to go up from $2 to $2.05. 5 cents, who gives a rip, right? We go to the grocery store, if they're $2.05 or if they're $2, we don't even know the difference. So that is an issue with trade, is that we have the benefits often concentrated, or costs for that matter, concentrated in a minority, whereas the benefits or costs on the other side are spread over a whole bunch of people. All right, so let's put just a little key point on that. Producers are usually more vocal because the benefits / harm of trade are more concentrated among smaller groups, smaller numbers of producers. So I put benefits and costs because if it's working to the benefit of the producer, then you're going to hear, oh, this is the greatest piece of legislation, let's pass the free trade, right? They're going to be vocal about that part too. Whereas the consumers, the benefits or costs are usually diffused over many people. So let me add the second note here. With consumers, the gains or losses are diffused across many people. So example, all strawberry consumers getting hit with a new price of $2.05 versus $2. We spread that 5 cents over 300 million people, nobody gives a rip. Nobody's even thinking about it. One of the big benefits of NAFTA, which come under fire with the Trump stuff coming up too, that a lot of people don't, or you guys may not appreciate just given your age. Avocados and strawberries, we can get nice ones now this time of year, right? If you go to Costco, Sam's, they are, looks like summertime, maybe not as good as our homegrown ones, but red strawberries that are really nice looking. A lot of that was due to free trade, free flows of strawberries and avocados across the Mexican border and across from other places too, but especially Mexican growers have developed and made bigger farms because they were able to export strawberries to the United States due to the North American Free Trade Agreement. And so that type of stuff, we get the benefits of. I've seen it more, not so much with price, but with the quality. The quality of the food has been so much nicer because those growers have been able to invest in higher quality equipment and growing techniques and whatever, and really come up to speed. And so we've seen a lot of those benefits in the United States. Okay, so last questions or comments there. We're going to kind of go to a different topic now, or slightly related, but we got to bring in this government intervention. If the strawberry growers of California are able to successfully lobby their politicians, they might be able to get some preferential treatment. And so that's what we're going to look at next, is what those things do. So barriers to trade. All right, so let's kind of start off this with barriers to trade. If anti-trade people capture the government with their rhetoric and persuade them that they're going to be hurt and they're going to lay off workers and whatever. If anti-trade people capture the government, there can be barriers created to protect the domestic producers, U.S. producers, domestic, so if it's our country, right, domestic producers. So number one on our list that we're going to lead off with, since it's a hot button politically, is a tariff. A tariff is a tax on imports. A tax on imports. Okay, so let me lay out. I think I'm going to do this slightly differently. I'm going to show some of these effects, but let me just lay them out here. So a tax on imports, and what it does is the tax is going to effectively raise the price domestically. So foreign, rest of the world must pay tax at the border, so to speak, and this will raise the price domestically. The hard part with this is to not forget that we have American strawberry growers and we have Mexican strawberry growers, right? And so the American strawberry growers, they're already here, so they're just going to go to the store and sell their strawberries. The Mexican strawberry grower comes to the border, gets hit with a tax, and therefore has to try to sell them at a higher price, which is then going to keep prices higher in the United States. That's the protection that the strawberry growers were looking for, is that prices won't fall to what they would have if they didn't have the protection. Lance?
Since they're being taxed on trade, that makes the value of the six and say strawberries higher than that are made in the U.S.
Yes, yes. So let me. I'm going to change my mind since you brought up the question. Let's just go to a graph. So we got the strawberry market. And now we're going to get into dollars, where again, those of you, just so those of you who didn't have micro, there's a little bit of supply and demand in here that Chapter 3 covers, but it's not required to get you through all of it. It's very little. But if you feel like what is this stuff? If you go to Chapter 3 of the e-text, then that's kind of the basic supply and demand that will hit harder in micro. You don't need to know all those details. So hopefully what I provide you here should be sufficient, and then also what's in that Chapter 7. So strawberries we've got a demand, and this is, let me call this strawberry market, the U.S. market. Strawberry USA market. So we have Americans that want strawberries, and we have this downward sloping demand curve. As the price of strawberries falls, people want to buy more strawberries. Okay? So that's our demand curve. Cheaper strawberries, I'm going to buy more. And then we have the strawberry supply curve. If U.S. American strawberry producers get a higher price, they're willing to sell more because they're going to make more money on it. And so the interaction of strawberry, U.S. strawberry sellers and U.S. strawberry buyers gives us this magic spot called equilibrium, where the strawberries will sell for, let's say, $2. And so we're going to use this notation. That's called the P star, is the equilibrium price. So it's just the price of strawberries. You go to Walmart and they're $2, basically, is all we're saying in this supply and demand framework. And that's going to lead to a certain amount of quantity being exchanged in the market. Let's just say it's 1,000 crates, whatever that is. Maybe it's 1,000 million, I don't know. Let's just say it's 1,000. This is what would be going on if we were closed off from the rest of the world. We don't have any trade. So think about this being now a no trade price. No trade is the way the textbook shows you as well. No trade in this, no international trade, right? So Americans are trading with each other, but there's no Mexican trade or other countries coming in. All right, now, if Mexico has a comparative advantage, let me back up one more thing. If we think about all the costs associated with strawberries, the price of strawberries being $2 can be mapped to a cost. The strawberry producers over here takes land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, right? So the price of a strawberry, we have the profit going this way, we have the cost to the labor, the cost of the strawberry pickers, the tractor, right? So all of the $2 represents a cost, including profit, to the strawberry grower. My point with that is that this is the opportunity cost of strawberries in the United States to the American strawberry growers, just like what we were doing with the other picture. So no trade. We can also put on here, this is the opportunity cost in the U.S. What's the opportunity in strawberries? $2, because the price is currently $2 with no trade. Now, if Mexico turns out to have a comparative advantage in strawberries, is their cost lower or higher? If Mexico has a comparative advantage in strawberries, which by the way they do, is their cost lower or higher than $2? Lower. Lower, right? So the low-cost country has the comparative advantage. It means Mexico's better at strawberries, relatively speaking, than we are. They can do it cheaper than us, just like what we did with cars and food in Japan and the United States. So if Mexico can bring in, let's see, I got $1 there. Let's go with $1.50. If Mexico can sell strawberries and still make a profit at $1.50, right? That would be a good deal for American consumers or producers? Consumers, right? Consumers like low prices, so they're going to like the new lower price strawberries. Of course, the American strawberry producers are going to whine about it because now prices would drop to $1.50. Now, not every American producer of strawberries is going to be driven out of business. Some of the really good growers are still going to be able to make a profit at $1.50, right? Who are they? They're these guys right here. At $1.50, American producers are going to produce that amount of strawberries. So the quantity that they're going to produce is right here. We didn't drive all of them out of business. There's some, the really good ones again. The bad ones, yeah, they get driven out of business. But the really good ones, they can still make a buck at $1.50. You can still turn a profit at $1.50. So they're still going to survive. And at $1.50, consumers want to buy this many strawberries. The quantity that they demand, is that much. So at $1.50, consumers want to buy this amount, and let's go ahead and call this, I don't know, I'm not really drawn perfectly to scale. Let's go 1,300. Consumers want to buy 1,300 strawberries at $1.50. American producers are going to produce this amount, which let's just keep things simple and go 700 strawberries. And the Mexicans are making up the difference, right? So this horizontal distance is important in this international trade stuff. That distance translates down to the horizontal axis to these numbers. How many are the Mexicans exporting to us, or how many are we importing? 600, you got it. So imports equal 600. The amount of imports by the Americans is this distance here, and I'm gonna erase my strawberry just to kind of bring that home in here. That is the 600 is the imports. And then I can't emphasize enough that 700 of the total 1,300 is domestic production. So this 700 units equals domestic production. Okay, so that is what the picture looks like when we open up for trade and we get consumers enjoying a 50-cent savings. We've got producers that, the bad ones anyway, aren't producing anymore. They've cut back production and we're down producing 700. So they're not really liking, they used to get, those same producers, by the way, used to get $2, but they're still able to hang in there at $1.50. You with me on that? All right, now the tariff. Donald Trump comes into office and things get a little wonky. What happens if there is now a tariff of 25 cents? Every carton of strawberries that comes across the border gets zapped with a 25-cent tariff. The world price, this price is going to go up by the 25 cents.
But only for Mexico, right?
Only for Mexico, but that is going to have implications domestically because it's going to raise the price up.
Okay.
So what? And once we see it graphically, let me see what color I should do here. Orange, maybe black. No, let's try orange. All right. So at 25 cents, which makes this $1.75, right? So we have a 25-cent tariff, a tax on the import, and that's going to raise the domestic price within the United States, causing the Mexicans to cut back on selling here because the consumers aren't buying as much anymore, right? So strawberries are going to sell at $1.75, and the amount of imports has now shrunk. So I'm going to not dirty up this graph as much as possible. So this is the quantity of imports with 25-cent tariff. the quantity purchased went down. Consumers are buying less strawberries, and they're more expensive. And then this is the one that really gets me here. The people who suck at making strawberries are making more of them. The people who are good at making strawberries are making less of them, right? So there's really a distortion in the amount of resources being used. And so that's what happens with the tariff. We end up getting a reduction of products and higher prices. So I think from this election thing, that's what Americans should know. If we move this direction of tariffs, it's going to lead to higher prices. All right, questions or comments on that? I'll put that key point down here. An increase in tariffs will increase the prices of goods in the USA. And if it's strawberries, it's strawberries. If it's air conditioners, it's air conditioners. All right, so I want to get a quota on the board before we call it a day today so that you guys have a good amount of ammunition, and there's a few more in the chapter too, but I want to get them listed here. So let me list off a few of them. The big one here is a quota. A quota is a restriction on the quantity. So a limit on the quantity, not the price, on the quantity of imports. A limit on the quantity of imports. All right, let me get the list filled out first, and then we'll see where we end up. Visually, it's this. Instead of this story of we are currently doing 600 imports, what would happen if the United States, instead of doing the tariff, they just said, we're going to only allow 300 cartons of strawberries, right? That's the law. So if this shrinks down to here and it's cut in half, then what we're going to see is the price start to float up. So we're going to get the same impact of an increase in prices from a quota. The difference being that the government's not going to collect any revenue from it. So quota, in fact, let me add that little thing before I do 3. Note, no revenue, no tax revenue for government is one of the main things we get from the quota. With the tariff, the government's actually making a little bit of money. All right. Number 3, another one, big kind of on the whole Trump coming in here on the 20th, is regulations. So as we start to increase regulation, that can distort international trade patterns, possibly to the benefit, sometimes to the detriment, depending on what we're measuring with the regulations. So one of the things with China tends to pollute. Is it fair that our American producers are held to a standard of pollution that the Indians are not, Indians, right, are not? So over in India, maybe they can pollute more than we can. That means it's going to be cheaper for them, right? So that can cause some problems in international trade. So regulations, subsidies. So the government gives money to an industry. That's been a hot button over the last 20 years. So a local one would be the United States gives money to cotton growers. This is really a sad example, honestly. So we give money to the cotton growers down in Georgia, Turns out over in Africa, awesome climate to grow cotton. If we didn't have these subsidies going on to protect the Georgia cotton growers, mostly Georgia, of course, it goes over state lines, then the Africans that have nice place to grow cotton would be more productive with their cotton growing. But the subsidies keep the world prices lower because we're helping out, turns out to be pretty rich, long story short, pretty rich cotton growers down in Georgia anyway. So the American government funnels money into some of these agricultural areas, and that ends up distorting the values and the prices. All right, I think that's a good place to round it out. Yes, turn those in. So on a piece of paper, one person per sheet, actually. If you do half sheets, that's okay. But don't put two names on the same sheet. Put Russ Busted for phone. You can just put Russ Busted. The phone had a little blip.